So the final section, what are the recommendations to fight these three biases? How can you use data science, the three principles we've seen, to tackle confirmation bias? The example we saw earlier, we looked at how a founder who probably has decided they're going to place some Facebook ads, use that as part of their marketing strategy. So how do you fight that kind of a confirmation bias? Step number one, look for data that you don't, you don't value and hence you've ignored, or more dangerous one is you have avoided because it is uncomfortable. Getting a 360-degree view. So if you want to move away from confirming what you already know, you'll have to look in new places, look for new data, and make sure you have spread the net wide open. And number two, once you have good representative data, look for unusual insights. A lot of organizations make the mistake of going with standard patterns of analysis. I always say, if you look for if you approach analytics the common usual way, you will only find usual insights. If you want to find something interesting, you will have to perform an unusual pattern of analysis. And one example and one tip there is, start by disproving your hypothesis. This ties back to the exercise we had in the start. If you're trying to guess that the sequence of numbers, try to propose the very first guess. A better guess would be try to disprove what you think might be at play. So scout for unusual insights. And again, here, a lot of people go into AI, but again, simple descriptive analytics can solve a majority of problems for startups and for most organizations. AI has its place, but when you're trying to make day-to-day decisions or even strategic decisions, simple descriptive quality analytics can actually make a big difference. And number three, when you share a table of numbers to 10 people, they will come with 10 different conclusions. Whereas when you convert these into data stories, which has a narrative, has a recommendation, it's highly likely that those 10 people will be aligned. The mental models will align, and you will be able to make a decision within the room. So converting insights into stories is the third and final one. And that, in fact, opens your eye. There are several other examples of how information design helps people see things which they have been missing all these years. Perhaps I can share this example in some other time. But these three are the recommendations to fight confirmation bias. And this starts by recognizing that you are susceptible to this bias. Number two, using managerial science, how you can tackle the sunk cost fallacy. We saw the example of clinging on to bleeding customer accounts or low performing products. So how do you tackle this? First, you'll have to, again, take a step back and look at the overall outcomes your organization is targeting. Let's take the example of right-sizing the customer accounts. If the organization's priority is growth and margin, like profitable growth, then that should, again, have to come up with strategic clarity, and that is what the organization is driving towards. And number two, pick the right metrics. In this case, it could be revenue growth month on month, and second aspect could be, say, gross margins or margin per customer account. And then you convert this into some actionable frameworks. For instance, imagine a simple 2x2 framework where you have revenue growth on one axis and margins on the y-axis. Any customer who falls into the top right quadrant are those who are growing fast and have a good margin, whereas those in the bottom left are clearly those who are not growing fast enough and are low margin accounts. And there's very little reason to cling on to them. So that's when you need to make the call of letting go of some of these, even if you've invested 5 years with these customers. And that's where the third point comes in. How do you tackle dominant logic, or in other words, business as usual, how you've operated all along for managing change? Here again, the role of the startup founder or the leader is very important. First, they'll have to understand what's happening here, what's at play, and then convince their teams and empower them to make these decisions, letting go of some customers, some revenue, because it's not aligning with the organization's growth path. That's how you use managerial science to tackle the sunk cost fallacy. Final, social science to tackle the IKEA effect. We talked about how founders' ideas could overshadow others' contributions. Recommendation 1 is to tap into the power of collective intelligence. Collective intelligence is kind of like the wisdom of crowds. You bring together groups of people and you ask them for opinions. And then you find out, you get all these opinions together, and then you make a decision. A good example of this is from Google's early days. They set up an internal prediction market where they ask questions like, when would the next release of Gmail go live? What is likely to be the delay, if any? And they've interestingly found out that the answers given by these people across the organization, even beyond the product team, the answers given by large groups of people were more accurate than what the product managers had estimated. And this is because of a variety of factors, because they see a complete other perspective and other aspects which the product manager may not be looking at. So that's why the wisdom of crowds, the power of collective intelligence is very important. But the wisdom of crowds works only when you have the right crowd. So if you have 10 people who think and act just like you, asking those 10 people is not going to make any difference. You need to build an open environment where diversity can thrive. Example again from Google in the early days of YouTube, when they were building an app for iOS, they were puzzled by something which was happening, where they found that 10% of the videos were upside down. And they were wondering, why would people record the videos upside down? The engineering team was puzzled by that. Eventually, they found out that these were the left-handed users. These are people who had to flip the phone and hold it and click the pictures, click the videos.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And not a single member in the engineering team was left-handed. So no, the complete team had missed it. It's a classic example of when you don't have a diverse team, fresh thinking, you could get blinded by so many viewpoints.
Yep. And as we know, that feels like a fairly innocent example now, an innocent thing to leave out, but you extrapolate that to things like race and ethnicity and gender, and there's actually been really serious real world effects on people because of those blind spots early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And many of these start as, and which is why these are unconscious bias. Most of these are not by design, but because you don't have the considerations as part of the design, as part of the organization, the team structure, eventually when they impact people, they could have very serious consequences. And number 3, even when you have the right crowd, you'll have to foster a culture of curiosity and experimentation. So you need to tap into the wisdom of crowds, make sure you have the right crowd, and you have to make sure that the crowd can speak up and share the right viewpoints. And if you're wondering how could a bootstrapped startup or startup with little resources spend so much on experimentation, we went through this journey early on. In the first couple of years, we set aside some time as part of engagements to do some experimentation in projects. But eventually, when we looked at once a few years later, once we standardized our processes, we didn't have that luxury. We had set up very standard processes. So then, in order to experiment, we set up a labs team, a small 3 to 5 member team, and they didn't have the compulsions of delivering something the end of the month. So this was an investment we had done, and we enabled the team to pick projects, experiments which align with the organization's vision. And from accountability standpoint, we set up an innovation accounting model, which is part of the lean startup, where in 3 to 6 months, we set a target that at least some of these experiments should translate into some commercial features of products, so that you have some room to experiment, some room for failure, but at least some of these experiments should lead to something. And 4 years back, we started a lot of experiments, and one of those was applying deep learning in areas like geospatial analytics and computer vision. And today, over 20% of our revenue comes from commercial projects in these areas, which can be traced back to the experimentation efforts about 4 years back.